This session will be recording, and right now it is on recording.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
So Google, shall we get started? I think the number of people will start joining. I mean, we'll continue to join, but I think we'll get started.
Sure, yeah. Hello all, good evening. Thank you for joining for this session today. This is our knowledge sharing session. And today we have Mathew Waters from Saffron who will be speaking on the risk management. So before we go there, a couple of things, ground rules for the meeting. And I request you all take this as an opportunity to network yourself using the chat window and post all your questions using the chat option, not the QA button, as there is no QA button here. So please use the chat option and post the questions. We will be answering this during the Q&A session. And as usual, for any knowledge sharing session, if you are a PMI member, you will be getting a PDU credited to your accounts automatically. So, and with that, today we are going to have a session from Mathew Waters on how raising a risk awareness can help you to mitigate millions of dollars of risk on a mega yacht projects. So today is that session, and a little introduction about our speaker. Matt Waters is a senior account executive and territory manager in Saffron and Saffron Software Solutions, where he has been working for the past, 10 years he has been in the project management, and since 5 years he has been into the Saffron Software Solutions. With that, I request Mr. Mathew Waters to take this and give us his knowledge on how we can use the risk management. Thank you for joining, Matt.
No worries. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you. And hello everybody. So I'm just going to get my screen shared. So hopefully, if everyone can let me know when you can see the screen. Can everybody see that okay?
Yep,
yes.
We can see it.
Wonderful. And that is working. So you've already seen the screen of me and my daughter. And yeah, so just a bit more on my history, I guess, to introduce myself a bit more fully. So yeah, I'm 10 years in project management. Used to do a lot of scaled agile framework and working with construction and helping workflows and things like that. And took the leap into risk analysis and risk management. I honestly thought it was quite a closely related topic, and then suddenly realized that risk is a whole world in and of itself. And so I've been very lucky to be surrounded by some very high quality people here at Saffron, and learned a lot on the job, and of course learned lots from the many companies that I work with around the world. So today I wanted to start talking about how raising risk awareness can help mitigate, millions of dollars or pounds or rupees, from of risk from your projects. And I chose mega yachts because we all talk about construction and oil and gas and that every single day. And actually, I thought mega yachts might be a bit more of an interesting subject matter that we can all learn a bit about the world that happens in building yachts. And it's quite a special and unique environment. But there are some very poignant similarities between building yachts, which they're projects that could be anything from 50 million for what they call a small yacht, and what most of us would say is a big boat, all the way up to the one I saw on site in the Netherlands, which was £2.9 billion for a 7-story, 200-meter long yacht. It's my house could fit on the rear deck. It was an amazing experience, and I'll share a video after this next slide, just to kind of give you a very quick introduction and to see some of the scope and the complexities of these builds. But some of the similarities I wanted to touch upon between building a yacht or managing a project building a yacht and the world that we're all kind of used to living in. So there's many highly specialized subjects, so lots of different people that you need to collect and generate risk information from. They have some very demanding stakeholders, and we'll touch a bit on that in a moment. But I always liken that to sometimes government contracts where you've got lots of oversight, and you have to really work hard to manage the expectations of the stakeholders on the project. They operate in very, very tight margins, which I think is something we can all appreciate in construction and infrastructure and things like that. Something that is really new in the last few years, change in the yacht building business, is that contractual relationships are becoming ever more litigious. It used to be that the owner and the project manager would sit and have a chat and a cup of coffee over a table, and nowadays they bring 5 lawyers each, and they have a 1,000-page contract, and it's all very, very managed and very, very sort of deep litigious kind of expectations. And I think again that's something that we are all used to, with penalties and different expectations that we've got to try and hit in our day-to-day. And something I find quite interesting specifically is that the new technologies are often explored that have never been used. So I can tell that one project that's just been commissioned, the owner basically said, I want a hydrogen engine. Well, the company had never built a hydrogen engine for a boat before. Potentially they've got to do all of the R&D as well. So a very, very high risk endeavor. With no historic experience of building something. And I think that sort of challenge is quite an interesting topic, and risk and having a strong risk culture really helps in those kind of environments where you're maybe treading new waters. That to have a robust process around risk helps you to navigate those a bit more safely, and we'll come on to that a bit later on as well. And oftentimes in the yacht building, as in the world at large, or the project world at large, it's very much a compliance-based culture of risk in a lot of businesses. Just the tick, yes, we've done it. Oftentimes the subject matter experts don't necessarily want to invest time with the risk managers to really get to grips with the real sort of outcomes of their risks, and that can obviously cause challenges because they don't see the value of engaging with risk always. And so the risk manager, the poor souls, have to continually kind of fight that balance between delivering useful insights and trying to move away from that compliance-based risk culture. Okay. I'll keep reminding myself to slow down my talking, so I appreciate that English isn't everybody's first language. But if I do start speaking too quickly, feel free just to ping a quick note to say, slow down, Matthew. I get a bit excited on subjects that I'm passionate about, and that can often mean I speak quite quickly. So hopefully this will work. Here we go. I've got just a short kind of video. Oh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get that to play. Is that working? No. 1 second. Sorry, guys. I did test this and it did work. And now it's failing me. Okay, so we can skip past it. It really is just a cutaway video showing, the kind of different flaws on a mega yacht. It's a real yacht that's been made. We think we might know who the owner is, but they keep this very closely guarded secrets in the industry. But these are really phenomenal pieces of engineering, hugely complex, and very just opulent, and they really kind of it's a world apart from anything we all know as mere mortals on this earth. Okay, so just to give a little bit more insight into the case study that I'm going to be presenting today. So they're a Dutch yacht builder. They have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. We're talking multiple generations of families working in the industry, and the knowledge gets passed down. That contributes very much to their initial challenges around actually engaging with risk. Because hey, I've been doing this since my granddad's granddad, and we know what can go wrong. We don't need to worry. That kind of attitude. But around during World War II, they were all kind of commissioned to build military vehicles and stuff, but the world changed afterwards, and they started and turned to luxury yachts and moved away from barges and military vehicles. Typically, they're building for the super rich in the world, mostly North Americans and Middle Easterns and lots of Russians. All tend to like buying these mega yachts. But that comes with a cost, shall we say, and in many cases that cost is just such a high risk endeavor as a business to make. Oftentimes they have a very strong finish date, and so they often have to, if there are many scope changes and contract creep, which is something that we all can relate to, it often they have to just make it work and maybe pull 24-hour working days just to hit that date, because if they don't, then obviously the lawyers come in and it's all a bit messy. So the biggest risk when building a yacht are the owners and the stakeholders in the case of yachts. They're very exacting people. I think one of these yachts is actually definitely Jeff Bezos, as you can see in the top right-hand side there. And you may have seen in the news that he wanted to take down a listed building or a listed bridge, as you can see on the right next to him, so he could fit his super yacht through. And because I want to. It's a very different world, I think, but ultimately, he lost that argument, and they took the top half of the boat off and sailed them both through underneath, and then they rebuilt it in another location. So he didn't quite win that war. But in this particular instance, especially for boats, the biggest risks generally are it might not be the owners themselves, but it could be their requests. I know one story which I was told, which happened only a couple of years ago. They were inspecting. They were about 2 months from the launch of the boat, and they're about to start doing sea trials. And the owners walked into one of the decks, and he says, "Oh, it feels like this is lower than my other yacht. The ceilings feel low. I feel claustrophobic." And he was right. It was 2 centimeters lower. And he said, no, I want it higher. So they had to literally tear out an entire ceiling, which on a yacht is very difficult because there's millions of miles of cable and computers all built into the walls and ceilings. So it's not an easy job. And they had to raise it by 2 centimeters because, hey, that makes all the difference. So I find that, these sorts of projects, unique challenges, but there's lots of challenges that are going to be very familiar to each and every one of you in your day-to-day lives as risk managers, as project managers, and everything in between, sort of delivering large, complex projects around the world. Okay. One of the, I think this is a bit more on the Jeff Bezos boat, but yeah, one of the kind of statements that they hear often in the yacht building industry is just build the yacht. We don't care about risk. So the owners aren't really bothered. They've got a contract, and so that kind of trickled down. And when I started meeting and talking with this company initially, they knew they needed to do something. They created a risk register at the start of the project in Excel. Everyone spent an hour or two in a meeting talking about it, and then it was never looked at again until the project was delivered, if ever. Right. And so it didn't really serve any real purpose, but they were starting to realize that their profit margins were being so squeezed that we have to make some changes. We have to start looking at a different way of delivering these projects, right? Of delivering these boats, because I think they quoted the 6 projects in a row were unprofitable for them, and for any business that is that's a failing business, right? So they knew they had to change. They've got a history of experienced men and women who are resistant to the notion of risk. We have stakeholders who are just get the job done, I don't care about risk. And then also, to win the business of these big billionaires and things like that, they have statements like this on their website. Impossible is a beautiful word. It forces us to go beyond what we know and to create and to innovate and to keep pushing until the unachievable is achieved. It demands the very best from us. And so they're really actually setting themselves up for a bit of a tough job. I thought by that as well. But nonetheless, it paints a picture. And so we got talking to the client, discovered that they're, like I say, using Excel. They do one maybe big complex Excel risk register, might look something a little like this in parts with some matrices that we're all kind of familiar with. But I think it's fair to say that everybody who uses Microsoft Excel to manage anything, the only person who truly understands that spreadsheet is the person who made it. I think there was a statistic, there's a Microsoft statistic that 10% of all formulas across the world in their notebooks have a mistake, right? So we've got a huge room for error. If we're trying to calculate values, and then you might have John in project management who said, well, actually, I prefer it to be a different way. So he changes and makes updates, and so he's working on a different version. I've had clients with 150 different versions of the same risk register, which is no lie. And they're trying to run a business and run a multi-billion-pound project using 150 different versions of an Excel spreadsheet, which is a headache. It's difficult for everybody to keep on top of. But I use Excel every day. We're all going to carry on using Excel in our own right. But I think when we're moving towards the sort of risk and managing risk properly, and importantly, being able to create a visual representation of our risks. Excel, unfortunately, no longer fits the bill for that. And so the people at Safran and Mark, who we'll speak to a bit later on in the presentation, got together and built this wonderful tool called Safran Risk Manager. And so we just a quick insight, I guess, into Safran. We've got two solutions: a Monte Carlo risk analysis solution. It's a real deep dive technical modeling solution to create insights and help decision making on a project. That's not what we're focusing on today, but of course, if anybody is interested to learn about that, then just ping an email over to me. I'll share my details at the end. Today we're focusing on Safran Risk Manager. So this is the solution that is a visual representation of your risks. It's a digital and interactive collaborative risk register and risk database. So it's all your qualitative kind of information. And, it's kind of been designed to help organizations gain higher levels of collaboration around the risk process, to build a higher level of consensus around the information being collected, and provide a means to kind of create actions and mitigations and manage your contingency and see how your risks are spread over your entire portfolio of projects. And I think also, actually, one of the downsides of Excel is that you kind of jump through the first kind of phase, shall we say, and I'm getting ahead of myself because that's spoken about on the next slide. So this is the ISO 31000 from 2018, sorry. And this is effectively our two solutions and how they spread across the two. So with Excel, as I was saying, we kind of end up skipping this whole big section up here, which is a really important step as you start to try and understand and classify and build your kind of portfolio of risks or your risk register for a project. And oftentimes Excel really only focuses on this sort of central piece in the middle with risk assessment, and often maybe with at risk or some kind of loose basic Monte Carlo analysis, all done within Excel, but we're missing a large part of that ISO 31000 model. And so Safran Risk Manager is really trying to help companies get into, proper identification. They felt what is actually at risk. It gives them a chance to define the scope and the context of risks as per the project. And it also enables you to manage different scopes of projects very easily. So you can have some real simple, it might be an IT department managing their projects, their IT projects, and they just want to keep a track of their rolling risks. As they apply to those smaller, maybe £1 million projects. Conversely, you can also have multi-billion pound projects and manage your risk process through that. And being able to differentiate between the two and have specific matrices will, again, just really help with that picture. And it gives you that overview of risks in your organization and what you're kind of responsible for in and of yourself. It is a common mistake that, people jump into identifying the risks without consideration of the actual project context. And it is made worse by using spreadsheets, as they're sort of fixated on the likelihood and impact. And so, yeah, as I sort of said, the very first step in the ISO 31000 process is context. And Safran Risk Manager ensures that this step is completed before any risk can be captured. And then they make that so it's aligned to that 31000 ISO 31000 standard. Okay, so if one of the challenges that you're facing in your business is you're trying to improve the overall project risk management maturity, then the ISO 31000 is a great place to start. And of course, having a tool set in your arsenal, that empowers you to kind of embody that process and align yourself with the high standards that are expected is great. So, the title of this presentation is Visualizing Risk and How Raising Risk Awareness can help mitigating millions of dollars in risks, right, or unidentified risks, things like that. And so really where that begins is being able to provide feedback or information in a visual context or in a visual sense for users who are, subject matter experts and others, to actually start seeing a visual representation of the information. So it starts helping people move out of that compliance tick box. So what risks have you got on your project? What's the impact? Oh, it's £1 million in 6 months. They don't really engage in it. And so that actually makes it very difficult for a risk manager to provide valid value back into the project. And that just sort of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy then of, well, I don't see the value, what's the point, and that back and forth. And so one of the goals that we had with Safran Risk Manager is to help elevate the role of risk in an organization. Visualization became a huge part of that, and something that we found, especially within this yacht builder, within a few weeks, the risk manager, the subject matter experts, they started seeing immediately that they could have a direct impact on the outcome of the project in a positive light, right? They could actually see, if I engage with the topic of risk, you'll notice I can see, well, actually, Mark, Turner, he had pre and post mitigated positions. So the pre is the red bar at the bottom, and then the second bar in green is a huge delta. So he's done a great job in mitigating those risks. And immediately what we found is the subject matter experts started realizing, hold on, I can really contribute positively to this project. And they started engaging in the process, and they started having weekly or fortnightly risk workshops. And all of a sudden they had to get a bigger room, because all 65 people within a few weeks of being accessing the data in the way we presented it, they just started really engaging with the process. And I think that was the first step to raising that awareness and to start helping people start to see that you do have a really important role to play. And if you properly manage risks, then you can start looking at opportunities. And those opportunities are to increase your profit margins, to learn from lessons of old, and really start having that kind of shift in the culture of risk in a business. And the role moves, again, like I say, from that compliance base, and it starts becoming that kind of opportunity, really adding value and giving useful insights to stakeholders so that they can make decisions. And again, being able to see that, visualize that represented, for all to see, and very, very, very clearly. And that's just the trigger and the spark that a lot of people need. It also gives a risk manager a chance to see, yes, we've got Mark, he's doing a fantastic job of mitigating his risks, but we've got one or two people who I might need to give a quick nudge and say, hey, we need to take some action on your risks, because we need an improved post-mitigated scenario, or or it might be that you can notice on the top left-hand histogram, Jaden, you've only got one risk, sir. Let's talk about that. It might be that risk is actually a number of risks that he's kind of packaged into a hammock. It might be that he really does only have one risk, but it's a tombstone risk. And if that risk occurs, the whole project's kaput. But again, having this visualized data without having to trawl through a spreadsheet, that could be wrong. It could be the wrong version. It could be old. Having live, up-to-date information, easily accessible, and easily visualized, is a hugely powerful tool. So the idea that doing stuff to mitigate risks, is brought home when you consider like a Monte Carlo S-curve, right? And I think this is demonstrated, like if you can show people, like if we have an effective mitigation strategy and you've got a clear set of data, as represented by the pre and post S-curves here, that starts telling a story, and that starts helping people really see that if I am more aware of these risks, if I'm making my plan for my part of the schedule for my build, and I'm thinking with risk in mind, right? This culture starts shifting, the attitude around risk starts revolutionizing the outcome of the project, and that's a really powerful place to be. It's worth saying, actually, just as a note on here, Safran Risk Manager doesn't measure time in probabilistics. That would be done in Safran Risk. But what Safran Risk Manager does do is help you to start just getting an idea of that pre and post position. Again, really, so you can kind of manage your risk on a day-to-day qualitative basis. So this is a screenshot of the risk register. And again, it's designed in a way to help visualize and make a more interactive risk register. It's you can cut and shut it however you want, but importantly, the basis of how we build our register is we use the bow tie method. Okay, you can't do bow tie in Excel. It's got a one-to-one relationship. It's very, very difficult. But sometimes, there are multiple sources and multiple impacts to an event. Okay, and so having that bow tie approach again and visualizing it easily so people can see, you can see that there are mitigations and actions that have been assigned to some of these impacts and things, as the small shields. You can see that some risks are approved, some are not. Again, immediately a bit more of information can be gleaned from this at a glance. You don't have to explain this to anyone, right? You can look at this, spend 2 minutes looking at it, and everybody starts understanding what the register is looking like, what information they can draw from it. And that's a big step away from Excel, as we said at the start of the presentation. Oftentimes Excel, the only person who truly understands it is the person who made it. So this kind of alleviates all of that kind of stress. It's a single source of truth. You've got a risk register per project. You can have portfolios and all set up. And so your data's there and easy to access. And actually, our clients often find that this overall approach it actually enables much more collaboration and, importantly, more reliable data. Because this visualization and it means that if you disagree with it, it's easy to see, and then you can just talk about it, and you start refining this data down to an agreed upon set of data on your risks. That higher credibility lends towards higher levels of quality in your risk analysis. And that feedback, the old adage is garbage in and garbage out. And so when using a visualization tool and using a collaborative tool to improve that credibility, well, then, of course, you've got quality going in. And so you should get quality coming out of your insights. And again, that's going to start giving your stakeholders much more confidence in the reports and the insights that you generate for them, as you work through your project. And again, that overall is going to impact positively on the outcome of projects. Let's have a quick sip of tea, guys. I've started to get a dry throat. So, one of the things that everyone's kind of familiar with, and what we also showed on the Excel slide, is the risk matrix that everybody's used to. And this is a real life use case story pulled from the Dutch shipbuilders. So they would often plot all of their risk into a risk matrix, and they only ever really looked at the top right hand, the red. Okay, red is bad, right? Red is bad, green is good. Okay, so we don't really need to worry about green. That we're safe. Okay. But because we can run a very quick quantitative 1,000 iteration simulation on this data within Saffron Risk Manager before we go into the deep dive analysis, immediately in the workshop, it was no time between inputting some data and it was all available as they worked through the workshop, is they saw this very, very long tail on this green matrix risk. So it's a tombstone risk, effectively, right? It's a very, very low chance of occurring, but if it did occur, boom, the whole project falls apart. And so actually, that was an incredibly insightful change in perception for them. Because green is good, I don't need to worry about it. And so they almost kind of ignored it. And really, it was a relatively simple mitigation that they had to put in place to stop this happening at all. But if they hadn't done that and the risk did occur, they would have been kicking themselves because they were definitely aware of it. But they had hidden it within their matrix. And so therefore it just wasn't a discussion. And again, that kind of raising that awareness of risk it starts prompting these conversations that are hugely beneficial for people who are making decisions. And so the conclusion was, in this case, we better do something to mitigate this. I believe it was in the tens of millions of euros on a particular project. And in a game where the margins can be 1% or less or 2% or less, 13 million is a pretty big number to be saving and avoiding that project running over. I've got red lines appearing on our share screen. I don't know if you can see that. I think someone's drawing notes. No worries. Right. So, to be honest, I thought I was going to be spending a lot longer talking through my slides, but we're coming towards the end of the presentation. So we're going to have plenty of time to have a Q&A session, answer some questions, and maybe discuss some topics. So the conclusion is beginning the journey towards higher project risk management maturity is imperative. In today's age, we need to move away from this compliance-based risk practice. We need to improve our project risk management maturity. That's a tongue twister. There's actually some independent studies on that that I've seen. So even if you move from a low to a medium maturity, then you can expect to see between 7 and 15% in better performance on time and cost on your projects. That's a big percentage. I've seen the same report also said if you go from a medium to a high level of maturity, so that's where you're kind of running regular workshops, you've got solutions in place where you've got a proper risk protocol, risk process, you're achieving the standards of ISO 31000, all of that sort of stuff. And they've seen real feedback from the market, up to 28% improvements on the cost and time of their projects. Now they're the kind of numbers I think that we'd all be excited to achieve, right? So the drive to improved project risk management maturity is definitely imperative. Generating engagement in the risk management process from the whole project team begins to shift in the culture. So we'll never be more than a compliance-based risk company or organization if we don't start generating that engagement, right? And how do we do that? Well, that's risk awareness and risk visualization. And Saffron Risk Manager you've only seen a very small snippet of it, but it's a huge number of ways that you can visualize that data to get the right messages to the right people, to give an easy way of engaging in the process. You know, and undoubtedly, you know, we've seen it time and time again. The moment that starts getting used in the business, the shift in culture starts happening. And of course, with better risk management, you have more opportunities. I think that's such a great topic. Mark, who I'm going to introduce in just a moment, he's going to do some Q&A with us. I believe he's writing a thesis this week, or this coming week, on opportunities in risk management. So it'd be great to get some thoughts and some you know, some of his insights on that subject in just a moment. One that I really like is contingency can be profit in waiting. It can be a contentious subject, I realise, but if we are more effectively managing our project, we've got a higher engagement in our risk management process. We are effectively we're better mitigating our risks, and if we're mitigating our risks and anticipating them because we've got good processes in place to do so, then our contingency should be we should be able to save a little bit more of it. And of course, any contingency saved really is profit in waiting. And I think that's just always a good thought to keep. The boat client, our client, was they're actually really hesitant about starting with Safran Risk Manager. But honestly, like within, I'd say three to 6 weeks, the effective visualization of their risks, it caused an almost immediate shift from their subject matter experts. Their engagement improved. You know, in that first year alone on one project, they mitigated an additional 13 million in risks. I'm pretty sure the number's higher than that, but because he didn't show me it, he covered the screen. He said, "Oh, it's 13, it's 13." I said, maybe worried I'll put the price up. I actually saw how much money they were saving. But, you know, nonetheless, that's just it wasn't even a big project for them. But it's a great amount of money to save on a project. And I'm sure all of us would be proud of mitigating a risk of that magnitude. It really is the difference between success and failure, I think. So I've come to the end. I hope everyone's found some value in my ramblings. I've really enjoyed sort of telling the story about the Norwegian boat, the Dutch yacht builders. And I would love to open the floor to any questions that you might have. Whilst you're all thinking of some great questions, feel free to reach out to me. I've got my email address here. You can contact Suresh at the PMI and get in touch with me. We're happy to provide you with demonstrations, with trial licenses, with videos and lots of literature, just so you can start seeing what this journey might look like for you and your organization. We'd be really, really keen to learn about you too. So yeah, questions, please.
Hello, Matthew. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah. I would like to ask a question regarding, you talked about mitigation, which comes in the later part of the project. Do you have anything to say about, project risk versus the project budget itself, which is, allocated during the initial stage of the project?
That's a very good point, and I will defer that question to Mark. So I'm going to introduce Mark very quickly. Mark Turner he actually helped design Safran Risk Manager, but Mark spent 15 years as a risk manager delivering projects, in various different industries. He's an absolute genius, and I feel like Mark's answer would be ever more eloquent than my own. So Mark, welcome. Thank you very much for joining. And please tackle the question asked there.
Right, thank you, Matt. So the idea that we would define the budget of a project and then look and consider how much contingency we would need to mitigate, well, to deal with the occurrence of those risks should they occur. And one of the challenges which anybody who uses an Excel spreadsheet has is they're stuck with a deterministic value normally. They do the factored of probability times by the likely input or impact to give them a deterministic number. And we know from evidence of other supporting projects that those deterministic numbers tend to give us a confidence of usually around the 50% confidence of achieving the outturn of the project with the contingency budget that's held. Now, that can actually be quite detrimental to the project, because they go in and they say, I've assigned my contingency value. I can compare that to the overall cost or the value of the project, and we can see that I've got a number which I'm holding. But when really sort of analysing that information, they find it's insufficient to give them the confidence that they need to complete their project. And this is where the idea that we start quantifying the value of impact probabilistically rather than deterministically can start helping you make the decision about how much contingency you need to be holding for that particular project, not being driven by a very static probability times by the impact. And so for many of the organizations which we work with, we intend to see that they want to have a confidence level of around 70 to 80% confidence that they will be able to achieve the coverage of their risk exposure with the degree of contingency they have. Now, I know from my experience that many people just put a rule of thumb in place that says we know what the value of the project is, we can assign 10 or 20% contingency budget to that, and that should be sufficient. Well, what you can do is you can reverse those numbers and say, okay, tell me what 20% of your project value is, and we can then tell you how much confidence we have against those known identified risks on your risk register to give you a better feel as to whether or not you're under or overestimating the degree of contingency you have as a percentage of your overall project value. So there's lots of ways to make use of these calculations, which move away from that very sort of rigid approach, which we always see on Excel spreadsheets. Probability times by impact gives you a factored value, which is then summed to give you your overall deterministic contingency value. And I think we've demonstrated over a number of years that those mature organizations that look at this probabilistically actually have much more success in achieving their outcomes.
Yeah, I understand for a long-term project, the risk changes maybe every day. So yeah, thank you for the explanation.
And yeah, on that note, where you say risks change, one of the problems which anybody using an Excel spreadsheet has is how do you add in new lines into your register and keep the values the same? Because we know what senior management are like. They don't want to be seeing an undulating degree of contingency value. So we know how risk managers deal with this, or project managers. They have to manipulate the other values. They have to change the likelihoods. They have to change the impacts so that we can maintain a consistent endpoint value. Yeah, well, you don't need to do that with Safran or with any sort of probabilistic approach, because you've stated what your contingency budget will be. The thing that now changes is your degree of confidence against that budget on the delivery of your project. And if you introduce more risks onto your register but keep the contingency budget the same, then you'll see that there's a decrease in the confidence that you have of achieving your project. So there's real advantages to moving away from deterministic and into the probabilistic calculation range.
Absolutely. That's a really good answer. Thank you, Mark. So I've got a question here from Ibrahim. On a competitive lump sum contract, how can we convince customers to spend more due to unknown risks?
Yeah, so the classic unknown. So we've spoken already about the contingency. Now, contingency budgets are generally defined as being the known unknowns. Namely, you can define what you don't know and put a likelihood of occurrence around that to a degree. Okay, so that would generally become the technical management contingency budget held by the project for the release on the occurrence of those known risks. However, the unknown unknowns pose a problem because you can't quantify them. They don't get entered into the risk register because you can't say what they're going to be. And therefore, it becomes one of these experience games of understanding where have we succeeded in the past. Okay, and this comes down to lessons learned. And I think one of the key things about maintaining a consistent database through the organization's history is that when risks do occur, you can keep a record of them, and you can look back over your records of your lessons learned and say, okay, we've had 5 projects in the past on which these particular types of risk may have occurred, giving us a specific sort of impact. Now, you can't necessarily say in advance that those risks were even visible or knowable. However, in hindsight, you'll know that you've got a particular pattern forming, which can give you an indication of those risks, which, although you can't specifically name them, you'll know that there's an equivalent value common to your type of delivery on your project. And therefore, you can start using that lessons learned information to building up your parametric identification of the contingency to be held for the unknown unknowns. And generally, that contingency held is at management level. So the program director or the program manager will be the custodian of that particular part of the budget. And then when those risks do materialize on the project, then you can transfer the contingency from the management contingency onto the technical contingency for the project manager to then manage and release that contingency to the occurrence of that risk. But the key thing here is building up a repository of knowledge so that you can best assess what the potential unknown unknowns might be in the future. Now, of course, this becomes very much a probabilistic game, yeah, rather than being specific. But we know that as you build up a larger repository and a larger history, then you get a better feel for how much exposure you'll have to these unknown risks on your particular class of project. You know, and going back to Matt's presentation, mega yachts and those large ships, whilst they might range from a few $100 million to a few $1 billion, you can scale the types of impacts that they have, which were unknown risks that occurred. And as a consequence, you can start building that picture so you can project it forward so that the next time they build a mega yacht, they can say, okay, we know from historical inference that the impact of unknown unknowns was X amount, and we can apply that X amount to our new project. So having that consistent historical record, which Saffron Risk Manager can help you build because it's got the lessons learned capability, is fundamental to understanding and being able to answer that particular question.
Thank you. We've got a couple more questions coming through. So a quick question from Shashank. Forgive me if I'm saying your names wrong. So what's the significance of ISO 31000? And please tell us about the careers in risk management.
Yes, certainly. So for me, the ISO 31000 introduces that systemic approach to the management of risk. I mean, I've also studied with the PMI, so I'm aware that there's very much a close relationship between all of these standards. And you know, I'm a bit biased towards the ISO 31000 because of my history with the Institute of Risk Management. So up until December of last year, I was actually a director of the Institute of Risk Management, and they base a lot of their education and learnings around the ISO 31000. However, I've had exposure to a number of the international standards. So whilst ISO 31000 is predominantly an enterprise risk management process, yeah, I feel that it's got sufficient read across for the project management environment that it gives us that framework. And key to the framework, as stressed in Matt's presentation, is that contextualization of the scope of the project such that you understand what is at risk. And I know that PMI has exactly the same concept of don't just jump straight into identifying the risks. First of all, understand what the risk or what the objectives of your project truly are. And in my experience, I've run hundreds of workshops where we've identified risks. What I like to do is to take a step back in the first 30 minutes or so of the workshop and say, okay, please tell me the clear definition of the objectives of this project. Okay, and what we do is we write them on the walls, you know, with the sticky large A3 pages. Okay, and we write down the clear definition of the objectives to be achieved for the delivery of that project. And once we've got in our minds clear what it is that we're delivering, then we can start having exploration of the threats and the opportunities which would help to achieve those objectives. And Safran Risk Manager reflects that experience which I've had there by saying, okay, let's define the scope of your project with respect to the deliverables, the life cycle phases. And we also have this thing called the KDEX, which stands for changes, assumptions, dependencies, exclusions, and constraints, because all of those uncertainties add to the equation of, are we able to achieve our overarching project objectives? Okay, so having established what we are delivering, we can then have a much more fuller and rounded conversation about the threats and opportunities on the delivery of those objectives. So that's touches on sort of how I utilize the ISO 31000. My personal experience as a risk manager, I was an engineer, and I moved into the project management environment in a aerospace company. And one of the things I'd noticed was we didn't have a formal risk manager role. And so after I'd been in the project management team for a number of years, I actually approached our engineering director with a CV, and I said to him, with a job specification, and I said, we recognize that there's a shortcoming in our risk delivery, okay, and I think that I'm the best person to help you achieve that. So I gave him the job specification, and I gave him my matching CV to go with it. And so they didn't have much of an opportunity to sort of disagree. And within a few weeks, they'd appointed me as the first risk manager for that particular company. So one of the things that I pride myself on is being able to see those opportunities where they exist and trying to actually capitalize on those gaps. And I actually did the same thing a few years later when we moved into an enterprise risk perspective. And we'd been bought out by a major international corporation by that time. So I approached their chief risk officer and I said, I want to be your enterprise risk manager for the United Kingdom. And I gave them again job specification and my CV. And within a few weeks, they'd appointed me into the role. And it's something which I've mentored many young risk managers who are coming through. And I quite often say to them, find the gaps in the organization and go for it yourself, because the truth is, nobody's going to hand you these roles on a plate. Yeah, so it's really sort of incumbent upon you to seek out those opportunities that are best for you and apply yourself into achieving them. And I think that's it certainly saw me really well through my career. So I ended up as a vice president of risk management for this large aerospace company in the UK.
It's a great story, Mark. I never get bored of hearing that, to be honest. It's such a good story. So we've got a couple more questions. We've got 7 minutes or 6.5 minutes remaining of our time. So Suresh actually asked the question, how can we leverage risks and mitigations, and in parentheses, successful or not so successful, across different projects in the organization? So that sounds like almost like a lessons learned or a global risk register, right?
Yeah. What I would say is one needs to be very cautious not to exceed the boundaries of the project budgets. Okay, so where we have defined budgets for the mitigation of risks, we should keep those mitigation budgets clearly within the delineation of the particular project. However, as a program manager or as a senior manager within an organization who's got visibility across multiple projects, what you can start looking for is the patterns of commonality. And one of the things that Safran Risk Manager can do is actually provide you with the portfolio view. And the portfolio view can help you to assist in saying, I can see commonality between a risk on project A and a similar risk on project B. Now, as a senior person, I need to be thinking, is there a common approach that we can use to mitigate those two risks on two separate projects? And this is where the concept of enterprise risk really comes into its own, because you start to standardize an approach. So one of the classic examples, where I used to work, we were very dependent on the bearings for the turrets of the sensor heads that we used to deploy on our end aircraft. Okay, and we'd noticed that there had been a depreciation in the quality of the bearings that we were receiving. Okay, and this is across several projects, and each of the projects were trying to independently mitigate that particular risk. So what we did is we identified that as being a common issue. We elevated it to the procurement head of section, such that we can then have one single mitigation strategy which addressed the bearing issues, and we were able then to bring to bear the full power of the organization. So, you know, it's like as being a project manager, you've only got a limited scope, you've got a limited budget. However, the whole organization from a procurement perspective has got a much larger scope and remit to make change. So as a consequence, the director of procurement went to the directors of the bearings company and actually said, look, we're having a problem. It's affecting multiple projects, the same types of risk, although it might vary from project to project, but it's got a commonality there. Okay, and between them, they managed to work through a solution which increased the yield and the productivity of the bearings which were coming to us. And we could never have done that trying to work independently as individual projects. It's only because we'd seen the common pattern and leveraged the mitigation from that organization's perspective.
Excellent, thank you, Mark. And one final question, which I'm going to answer a bit myself, but the question is from Manahat, and it is, how do you see the future of risk mitigation evolving, particularly of emerging technologies and global trends? With a follow-up is how is AI being utilized specifically for risk mitigation in our context, and any successful examples? So I'm going to just tackle the little AI. This is a common question that I have in my day today. So what I find with the AI models is they are getting very, very accurate. They're great bits of technology to play, but that human kind of thought and requirements is needed. I think, stage now where if you use AI to say run risk analysis and something goes wrong, ultimately what people are resisting is that they can't then say no one can take accountability. So I've had one instance where it's like, well, why didn't you do it? Well, the computer told me not to, and it doesn't really stand up to scrutiny. And it makes it very difficult for risk managers and project managers to have sensible collaboration. And also it's a black box, right? And so how did it come to this conclusion, right? One of the great things about Safran Risk, which is our Monte Carlo analysis, is that you can see iteration by iteration. You can really interrogate, why is this happening? What is going on here? And what can we do to avoid it? And all of that sort of stuff. And it creates the conversation. And so how is AI being utilized for risk mitigations? I'll be honest with you, at the moment, I don't think it is directly being as heavily used as what we might think, but I think it's not far away from becoming more involved. But I think there are some hurdles to overcome. But Mark, if you want to take the rest of that question, so from your perspective as a risk manager, how do you see the future of risk mitigation evolving?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things here. As all of us on this call will know, that risk management isn't just one aspect. There's all sorts of things going from data management through to communications and understanding your particular subject matter and how to control the risks which are being identified by the subject matter experts. And to my mind, and one of the things which we're investigating in Safran at the moment is the use of artificial intelligence to help us migrate data. So one of the challenges we always have whenever you were going from one set of data to another set of data is to finding the read across and the mappings between those data sets. And one of the things which AI is particularly good at is reading and inferring meaning to text. So if we can say, a really simple example, in some databases, you might use the word cause, and then other database, you might have the word source, okay? And they might mean the same thing. The same goes for impact and consequence, okay? Now, this is a very simple example, but if we could use the technology to say, okay, in this database, we're talking about sources, and in this database, we're talking about causes. How do we marry those two pieces of data together such that we can migrate the data from one data set to another data set? Okay, and we're using that type of thinking to help us build the data migration pathways for future customers. So that's one aspect. Another aspect which I've demonstrated a number of times to some to audiences is the use of how ChatGPT can assist me as a risk manager to quickly identify the types of questions which I should be asking of the subject matter expert. And I think this is fundamental for a risk manager, because, to be honest, I've been a risk manager for many years now, but I'm not an expert in software delivery or hardware delivery. I'm not an expert in pneumatics or hydraulics or construction through tunneling and boring or pipe work. I can't physically hold all of that knowledge in my head. However, as the risk professional, what I need to be able to do is skillfully ask the subject matter experts how they perform the risk assessment for their particular area of expertise. And now what I've been doing is I've been actually using ChatGPT to say to me, how would I ask the question of a tunneling expert about the tunneling risks associated with their project? And it can give me an insight into the types of questions that I can then ask for the subject matter expert to then complete the data requirements to capture the risks in their fullest. Because otherwise, if I go in there and just ask a lame question, I'm only going to get a lame answer. So I think helping me to be able to communicate better to people who are subject matter experts in a discipline which I don't know very much about has actually been really useful.
That's a great answer, Mark. Thank you. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. I really hope everyone's taken some value and learned something today. Once again, I invite any of you to reach out to us if you would like a demonstration or to discuss any of your own challenges that you might have. We're all on hand, happy to engage with you, and we'd really love to hear from you.
Great. It's a great session, Matthew and Mark. We really appreciate your time, you taking time and giving us valuable insights onto the risk management. And great thank you, Matthew, for you that you've taken over my job as well, moderating and taking the question and answers. So appreciate that. And that brings to end of the session. If you give me option that I will share the screen.
Yeah, I'll hand that back to you. 1 sec.
Yep. I hope everybody can see the screen.
Yes, we do.
Yeah. And a couple of small announcements from our side. We are having an ACP workshop coming up, PMI ACP workshop that is coming up on 27th, 28th, and 4th of May, 27th and 20th of April, and 4th of May. If you have any friends or family who wants to take this workshop, please contact our Academy portfolio numbers is given here, and also the email. Please reach out to him. And thank you, Matthew. On your name, we are giving actually a ticket of 5 trees actually planted on your name in the Tiger Reserve Park.
Thank you.
So you will get a certificate as well. So thank you. And whenever you want, you can see those trees in the place. I appreciate that. And finally,
really nice thought.
Thank you. And last but not the least, the PDU. You will be, whoever joined this session will get a PDU automatically credited to your accounts. If you find that you are missing the PDU, please contact events@pmi-pcc.org. We will do the needful. And thank you all for joining on the Saturday evening. Appreciate all your time and a good session that we had, a very insightful onto the risk management, and appreciate all. Thank you. And we can close the session now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mark. Talk to you later. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.